Beneath the Laurel Shadows, the forgotten lives of Rome's silent women step into the shadowed alleys of ancient Rome, where history rarely dares to look. Beneath the Laurel Shadows tells the haunting, human story of 6 forgotten women surviving behind the painted curtain of a Roman brothel. This isn't a tale of scandal, but of strength, of quiet mornings scented with rosewater, of whispered laughter in steam-filled bathhouses, and of friendships forged in silence. You'll meet Livia, the brothel's silent protector, who carries memories heavier than coins. Aaliyah, still dreaming of love in a world that trades hearts for silver. Vibia, mysterious and branded, hiding poems inside stone walls. Marcia, whose fading breath still hums with lullabies. Duna, bold and broken, loud with defiance. Hortensia, once refined, now worn thin with wisdom. These women marginalized by society, registered by the state, forgotten by time, share not only their bodies, but stories, fears, and fragile hopes. As Rome's chaos roars outside, their lives unfold in soft rebellion, rituals with oil, stolen moments of joy, secret plans to escape. When death quietly visits their door, grief sparks transformation. Through heartbreak, healing, and memory, one of them dares to leave it all behind. This is a story about survival, dignity, and the gentle reclaiming of identity. A story where every silence speaks. Every name once erased is whispered back into the world, and every step away from the past leads closer to a forgotten kind of freedom. Part 1. The perfumed doorway of Vanalia Street. The morning sun rose slowly above the rooftops of the Subura district, that unruly heart of ancient Rome. It slipped between terracotta tiles, glided past flaking frescoes, and stretched into narrow alleyways where shadows still clung to the stones. There, in the scented mist of the early hour, a wooden door creaked, open on Vanalia Street. The smell of sweet myrrh wafted out into the alley. A hint of frankincense lingered. A worn sandal stepped into the dust. Then another. A woman emerged in a crimson-stained stole, her long black hair coiled high and pinned with a bone comb. Her name was Livia, and in this city, her name was never spoken aloud. Livia stood beneath a faded fresco of Bacchus, painted on the wall just beside her doorway. She glanced at it, as she did every morning. Bacchus smiled eternally, cup raised, dancing girls forever, frozen beside him. Behind Livia, the house was still quiet, though the soft rustle of linen and a half-suppressed cough betrayed the other women beginning to stir. It was a brothel, but no sign declared it. Only the painting and ancient code that all Romans knew. She moved to the edge of the street and sprinkled rosewater from a small ceramic vial into the gutter. It was not a religious act, but a ritual of her own making. For protection, for luck, for memory. Livia believed in old gods, in broken promises, and in the mercy of repetition. The street vendors hadn't arrived yet, but Livia heard their distant footsteps and the groan of wheels as carts rolled into position down the hill. Soon, the voices would rise: fishwives yelling prices, boys shouting over fruit baskets, soldiers grumbling as they haggled over plums, and eventually, the men would come to her door, or Marcia's, or little Elias. Livia had once been named something else, a name from the provinces, from a green place with fewer walls and more birds. But that name was gone now. She did not think of it anymore. It had been taken from her the moment the magistrate wrote her down in the census as a meretrix registered, taxed, legalized. She remembered the ink and the sharp smell of the stylus. Inside, Marcia stirred. She had been coughing for days now. Not the dramatic, wet cough of the sick rooms, but the slow, tired kind that crept in and never left. Livia would go to the herb cellar later, ask for more horehound or fig leaf. She might even trade a hairpin. The brothel had 6 women: Livia, Marcia, Aaliyah, Vibia, Duna, and Hortensia. Their names, like their bodies, belonged to the house. Alias Faustus owned the place, but rarely came. He collected rent through a freedman who smelled of sour wine and wore green rings. They each had a small cell, called a cella, no larger than a pantry, with just enough space for a bed and a hanging curtain. The walls were thin, the air often stale. The clients varied: old senators with trembling hands, sailors from Ostia with salt still in their hair, drunk boys pretending to be men. Some stayed minutes, some stayed hours, none stayed forever. Aaliyah, the youngest, barely 17, still wore ribbons in her hair. She tried to smile at every man. She kept a cracked mirror hidden under her mattress, where she practiced looking surprised, innocent, amused. Livia did not tell her to stop. Everyone needs something. Vibia was the quiet one. She painted her lips with crushed mulberry and rarely spoke unless asked. No one knew where she came from. Her Latin was strange, halting, careful. Her left arm bore a faint brand, long since healed. She slept curled like a cat, eyes half open. Duna, large and loud, came from the north. A Gaul, with milk-colored hair, and a booming laugh that could fill the atrium. She drank too much, argued with clients, sometimes hit them, but she could charm a baker into giving them day-old loaves or talk. A wine cellar down by half, Hortensia had been elegant once. Her voice still carried the rhythm of schooling, of poetry memorized in childhood. She knew the names of philosophers and emperors. No one asked why she was here. She never said. Marcia, pale and coughing, used to sing soft lullabies, old songs, about shepherds and river gods. Now, her voice rasped too much for melody. She wrapped herself in shawls and read scraps of parchment rescued from the trash heap behind the scribe's shop, and Livia. She watched them all. She kept the door swept, the water warmed, the linen soaked in lavender. She had no illusions. She no longer sang. She no longer wept as the day warmed. The brothel came to life, voices low, bodies busy. Livia stood at the basin, combing Elia's hair. Aaliyah chattered about a man with green eyes who'd left her a fig. He said he'd return with a bracelet next time, she whispered. Livia smiled without meaning it. She had heard that story before. The first man arrived just before noon, a merchant, bloated with wine and boasting about olives. He chose Duna. The curtain swayed. The door shut. The sound of sandals scraping tile filled the hallway. Outside, Rome pressed on. Chariots clattered. Vendors shouted. The world spun, oblivious. Livia fetched water, boiled herbs, folded tunics, repainted her lips, waited because the day was long, and it always came back to the door. Part 2. Secrets behind the painted curtain. Night in the Subura did not fall, it crept. The light thinned slowly between buildings, dimming by layers until the walls seemed to lean in close, whispering old stories and scandal. As the sun vanished, behind the Aventine, the lamps were lit on Venalia Street, their flickering flames dancing inside red-tinted glass, casting strange shadows across the brothel's entrance. Livia stood near the doorway, watching. She didn't need to keep guard, no. One stole from this house, and clients rarely caused trouble, but she had grown used to the street at dusk, the way the air thickened with roasting garlic and wine, the way laughter rolled from nearby taverns, the way shadows lengthened as if time itself were tired. She found the stillness strangely beautiful. Inside, Vibia was speaking softly to a man who smelled of parchment and ink. A scribe, probably. She always attracted the quiet ones, the readers, the thinkers, the ones who spoke in slow, thoughtful Latin, as if words were sacred. Livia wondered what he had asked her this time. Perhaps a poem, perhaps silence. Down the hall, Aaliyah giggled. Her latest admirer had brought the bracelet, as promised. A thin band of tin, with colored glass, embedded like gems. It glittered in the lamplight, cheap and lovely, and Aaliyah had cried when he gave it to her. Now she kissed him like she meant. It maybe she did. The air inside the brothels smelled of oils, cinnamon, almond, musk. Beneath that, the faint tang of sweat and wine and something older, memory, perhaps, or resignation. Marcia hadn't left her bed. Livia brought her a fig and soaked cloths for her head. Marcia thanked her in a whisper. Her lips were pale, her eyes sunken. Livia sat with her for a while, saying nothing. The sickness had made her small, too small. "Do you remember the story of the river nymph?" Marcia asked suddenly. Livia looked down, the one who sang men into forgetting their names. Marcia nodded weakly. Yes. She lived in the reeds and combed her hair with golden fingers. When she sang, men would forget everything, even why they had come. "You used to sing that," Livia said. Marcia smiled. "Yes, and now I forget the tune." Later that night, a group of soldiers arrived loud, swaggering, already half drunk. They chose quickly. Hortensia took one, Duna too. Aaliyah tried to sneak away but was pulled back with a playful slap. Livia stepped into the shadows, unseen. She did not feel fear. She felt tired. Outside, the street hummed. A drunk woman sang by the fountain. A child chased a chicken. Somewhere, an argument broke out over dice and ended in laughter. The curtain to Livia's cella fluttered. Someone was waiting. He was older, with gray at his temples and a scar that split one eyebrow. A senator maybe, or once had been. He removed his sandals with care, sat slowly, said nothing. Livia studied his eyes. Not cruel, not desperate, just hollow. He reached for her hand, but did not pull. Livia waited. Then, gently, he said, "I don't want to touch you." She raised an eyebrow. "I just need to talk." She had heard that before, but his voice was not like the others. There was no tremble, no lust behind it, only a quiet ache. He told her about his wife, now buried, about a daughter who no longer spoke to him, about a garden in Capua and how the fig trees used to bloom there every spring. He wept, just a little. When he left, he placed a gold coin on the table. Livia did not touch it. In the silence that followed, she lay on her back and stared at the wooden beams overhead. There were cracks in the ceiling she knew by heart, patterns she'd traced in her mind 1,000 times. Tonight, they looked like rivers, branching, winding, dry dot. She rose, draped a shawl over her shoulders, stepped outside. Rome by night was both beautiful and cruel. The stars flickered above like curious gods, peeking between marble columns and tiled roofs. The Tiber glistened in the distance, a black serpent winding through the city. Livia walked. No one stopped her. A few men looked, then looked away. Perhaps they recognized her. Perhaps they didn't care. She walked past bakeries, their ovens dark, past bathhouses closed for the night, past the Temple of Fortuna, where silver offerings glittered under the moonlight. Eventually, she reached the old fountain, cracked, mossy, forgotten. She sat on its edge and closed her eyes. She remembered the sound of birds. She remembered her mother's voice, soft, stern, singing while she kneaded bread. She remembered a boy who gave her a sprig of laurel. Once, just before he went to war, she remembered her old name. She whispered it. Just once, then let it go. When she returned, the brothel was quiet. The men had gone. The women slept. Only the oil lamps flickered gently, their light golden and kind. Livia paused outside each curtain. She listened to breathing, slow, steady. Marcia stirred, murmuring something about a river. Aaliyah clutched the bracelet in her sleep, in her cella. Livia lay down on the linen sheet. She did not cry. She did not pray. She simply watched the cracks in the ceiling, and for the first time in weeks, imagined the sound of water, not rain, not a bath, a river, flowing cool and wide. She fell asleep, thinking of fig trees blooming in Capua. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Part 3. Whispers in the bathhouse. Steam. Morning came wrapped in mist. The Subura still slept beneath a veil of pale fog, and even the loudest hawkers delayed their songs. The cobblestones were slick with dew, and above, the clouds looked like old wool stretched thin across the sky. Inside the brothel, the air was heavy with sleep. Livia rose slowly, stretching her arms, her joints clicking like old hinges. Her throat was dry. She reached for the clay pitcher beside her bed and sipped the stale water. In the stillness, she heard Aaliyah's soft humming from 2 rooms over it. Habits she'd picked up from Marcia, who hadn't sung in weeks. There was no laughter this morning, no footsteps, just the rustle of cloth and quiet breath. Livia wrapped herself in her shawl and stepped into the corridor. The others had not yet dressed. Hortensia sat by the window, plucking at her fingernails with a sliver of bronze. Duna was already awake, braiding her thick hair into knots. "You're going out?" Hortensia asked, without looking up. "Bathhouse?" Livia replied. It was not a luxury. It was survival. The public baths of Rome were crowded, loud, and smelled of sweat, oil, and steam, but for women like them. They were also one of the only places where the body could be restored, not purified. There was no such thing, but soothed, perhaps softened. Livia took a small bag of oil, a comb, a coarse cloth, and a coin. She didn't dress in anything fine, only a plain tunic tied at the waist with a frayed cord. Her feet were bare. No need for sandals where she was going. Belnia was only 3 streets away, but it felt like another world. As she approached, she passed bakeries already alive, with the scent of warm bread, butchers setting out cuts on thick wooden boards, and a schoolmaster chasing a pack of boys with a switch in his hand. At the bathhouse entrance, the attendant gave her a long look. She met his gaze without flinching. "No perfume today," he said. "None for you," she replied. He chuckled, stepped aside. Inside, the marble was cracked, but the pool steamed as always. The scent of oil and damp stone clung to the walls. Women drifted through the changing rooms like ghosts, matrons, widows, foreign wives, and a few others like Livia, who knew how to make themselves invisible. She disrobed quickly, folded her tunic, and stepped into the frigidarium first. The cold pool bit her skin sharply, waking every muscle. She closed her eyes, let the shock sink in, then moved to the tepidarium, where the water was warm, smooth, forgiving. There, she sat on a bench near the wall and watched. A pair of noblewomen whispered nearby, giggling behind their hands. Their slaves scrubbed them with pumice, applied rose-scented oil, wrapped their hair in fine cloth. Livia envied nothing but the silence they received. No shouting, no demand, just service. A servant approached her with a bowl and a cloth. She declined. She would scrub herself. As she worked, she listened to the sounds around her, the splash of water, the hiss of steam, the laughter that echoed from the caldarium. The echoes felt ancient, as if they belonged to all women, across centuries. Someone sat beside her. "You scrubbed too hard," said the voice. It was Vibia. Her skin glistened, and her hair, dark and sleek, fell like ink over her shoulders. "I'd like to feel clean," Livia answered. "You'll scrape yourself raw. Perhaps that's the point." Vibia chuckled, low and knowing. They said little after that. They didn't need to. They soaked. They moved from the warm bath to the hot. The caldarium wrapped them in steam and silence. It was in these moments, beneath the heavy air and muffled voices, that Livia allowed herself to believe in softness, in the possibility that a body could be something more than currency. That skin could hold memory, not only labor. After the bath, she sat near the garden in the courtyard, where ivy clung to the walls and a cracked statue of Venus leaned drunkenly on her pedestal. The scent of rosemary drifted on the breeze. Vibia joined her again, chewing dried apricot. "We should leave," she said suddenly. Livia raised an eyebrow. "Go north, or east, Egypt even. I've heard stories." Livia smiled faintly. "With what coin? The 2 denarii tucked in your sandal." "I have more than you think," Vibia said. A man left me a ring last week. Jade. I traded it for silver. And how far would that silver get us? To the forum, Vibia shrugged. Far enough. Livia didn't answer, not because she disagreed, but because wanting something, speaking it aloud, made it heavier. Hope was dangerous. More dangerous than men. More dangerous than time. When they returned to the brothel, it was early afternoon. Aaliyah met them at the door, eyes bright. He's back, she whispered. The green-eyed one, Vibia asked. Aaliyah nodded. He brought me a poem. Livia blinked. A poem. He wrote it himself. She held out a square of parchment. The ink was fresh. Slanted lines, uneven strokes. Vibia leaned over. It rhymes, she muttered. Surprised. He said he wants to take me away, Aaliyah said. No one answered her. Inside, Marcia was sleeping. Her breaths came in shallow bursts now, like leaves trembling on a branch. Hortensia sat beside her, fanning her gently with a folded piece of bark. She looked up, eyes tired. She's worse, Hortensia whispered. I'll go to the temple, Livia said. To pray. To bargain. Livia left just before sunset. The temple of Bonadi was tucked behind a colonnade, its columns smooth and white. Inside, the priestesses were already preparing for evening rites. Livia waited until they lit the incense, then stepped forward and laid down her offering, a strand of her own hair. Tied in thread. The priestess took it wordlessly. Livia knelt. She did not ask for miracles. She asked for time. Give her another week, she whispered to the marble floor. Let her see the moon again, just once more. No voice answered, only the faint crackle of burning herbs. She returned home under a sky smudged with red and purple. The air smelled of smoke and coming rain. Inside, Marcia was still breathing, and for that night, it was enough. Part 4. What the river carries. Rain came in the early hours. It pattered softly on the tiled roof above the brothel, leaking gently through the cracked terracotta and dripping into pails Livia had placed with practiced ease. She sat awake in the dark, listening not just to the rain, but to Marcia's breathing. It was slowing. Marcia lay curled beneath 2 blankets. Her skin was nearly translucent, stretched thin over her bones. Her hands twitched now and then, grasping at dreams. She muttered softly in her sleep names of rivers, songs, perhaps her mother's voice. Livia held one hand gently, her fingers damp with fever. When morning broke, there was no change, but all the women knew the time was near. They moved quietly. No laughter, no teasing. Even Duna, usually loud by nature, wore silence like a second. Aaliyah tried to offer a slice of bread with honey. Livia declined. She asked for fig wine last week, Hortensia said from the doorway. I said we'd get some, but I never did. I'll go, Livia said. No, let me. Hortensia stood slowly. I owe her. While she was gone, Livia changed the linens and wiped Marcia's face with warm water. She whispered to her stories. Of rivers against stories, Marcia once told them all late at night, when the men had gone, and the only sound was the flicker of the lamp. She used to say there was a stream outside her village, Vibia said, standing in the doorway. That it was sacred, that if you dropped in a pebble, it would carry your sins to the sea. She had many sins to send, I imagine, Livia replied. So do we all. That evening, Marcia drank a spoonful of fig wine and smiled. Just once, and then, quietly, without ceremony, she slept and did not wake. The brothel became still, not cold, not heavy, just still, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The women gathered by her bed. Duna placed a dried flower in her hand. Aaliyah kissed her forehead. Vibia sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, whispering something. In her own tongue, she'll be taken in the pauper's cart tomorrow, Livia said finally. Unless we offer the gravediggers something better. We'll find something, said Duna. She deserves it. By morning, Vibia had sold her silver ring and Aaliyah her tin bracelet. Duna convinced a merchant to donate cloth for the shroud. Hortensia paid a priestess for a blessing. Livia made sure her hair was combed and her face clean. The city did not stop for death. Rome churned on, but in one small street in the Subura, 5 women stood beneath the Laurel Shadows and watched their friend return to the earth. When the cart rolled away, Livia did not cry. She held the urn of rose petals Marcia had loved and scattered them into the wind. That night, she lit a single lamp and sat in silence. No client knocked. No footsteps passed. The city was quiet, and the next morning they opened the door again. Business returned, slowly, awkwardly. Men came, men left, and life, as it always did, resumed. But something had shifted. Aaliyah stopped wearing ribbons. Duna drank less. Vibia began writing on scraps of discarded parchment with ink borrowed from the scribe's apprentice. No one knew what she wrote, but every evening she folded the paper carefully and hid it in the bricks behind her bed. And Livia began to walk more. Not far, just enough to feel the city breathe around her. She wandered past temples, fountains, and forums, watching, listening. She began to notice things again: the color of a lemon on a market stall, the smell of fresh pine sap, the texture of marble when warmed by the sun, and she started speaking with a woman at the temple of Bona, a healer, old, wise, fierce. The woman taught her about roots, about teas, about oils that eased pain and herbs that calmed the mind. "You remember well," the healer said. "You listen better than most." "I've heard too many things I wish I hadn't," Livia replied. "I remember what's useful." The healer looked at her hands. "You don't have to go back." Livia blinked. "What? Here, you could stay. Work here. Clean linens. Mix salves. We could use another hand." It was an offer. No chain. No demand. Just possibility. She did not answer right away. She walked home, past the noisy taverns, past the perfume seller who winked at her, past the man with green eyes who now came less frequently, and when he did, left quickly, leaving only coins. That night, Livia sat by Marcia's empty bed. She thought of rivers, of laurel leaves, of the sound of rain, and the next morning, she rose early, before the others stirred, and began to pack. She left her crimson stola folded at the end of the bed, took only her comb, her oil pouch, and the bone pin from her hair. Vibia hugged her without words. Aaliyah wept softly. Duna grunted something about strength. Hortensia handed her a folded note. "For remembering," she said. Livia stepped into the morning light and closed the door behind her. She did not look back. She walked to the temple, to the herbs, to the future, and the city, ancient and indifferent, whispered around her. It whispered of forgotten women and broken names, of secrets behind curtains and laughter in steam, of rivers that carry scenes and songs that carry love. But Livia was not listening to the past anymore. She was listening to her own breath, one step at a time, toward healing, toward her name, toward herself.